Hello, and welcome back to the God the Artist podcast. I'm your host, Morgan McCarver, and today we have special guest Joseph Bolton. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Joseph.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, Morgan.
Let's start off with our first question. Can you tell us who you are and how you like to be creative?
Okay, my name is Joseph Bolton, retired Army officer, did 25 years, served in Afghanistan, uh, father of two, and I am also the author of a fairly new book series called Old Grandmother's Tree. We have 3 volumes right now. The fourth volume has already been written and it's being illustrated and will be out next year. And I also have a preview for that fourth volume. It'll be coming out as a comic, about a 20-page comic preview will be coming out this year. So a lot going on with the book series, and I'd be happy to talk about it.
Yes, awesome. Congratulations, and thank you for your service as well.
Thank you.
Um, Tell me about this idea of releasing a comic before you're releasing a book. How did that come about?
Well, if you look at the whole book series, we're very Natasha. There's three of us working together. I'm the writer. I have a storyboard artist named Masami Kiyono who lives in Manhattan. So she does like the rough sketches and storyboards to story. And then I have a finishing artist named Natasha Pelly Smith out of Toronto. So the three of us together as a team, we're very creative and experimental with our designs of the book and the designs of the stories. Um, for example, in this book series, we have they're very large text. I mean, number of words we have, I think is about 60,000, and we probably have close to pushing almost 700 full color illustrations. So as a result, you have this very large illustrated book with almost one illustration per page. So it's almost a graphic novel. It's kind of a hybrid. So that's one way it's kind of experimental. But within that books, within the 3 volumes, there were sections that are very much like a comic. And when we've done kind of a comic style, graphic novel style, we've only done very short stories, maybe about 5 pages. But we've always wanted to try that format. The books, our philosophy with the books is always to have the very visual medium. That's why we have so many illustrations. So in this one, we had a great idea for a story that kind of is like a sequel to the main books, and it's going to involve AI, robotics, but it'll also involve some of the familiar trickster animal characters that appear in the other part of the book. So there definitely is a continuity, and also one of the villains from the previous books is also in this one, and it's set actually in the 22nd century, where the other books are set right at the end of the Ice Age, into the 17th century, in the early 1900s in Quebec. So we're very experimental in our time and our location with our stories, but we always have a certain number of characters that tie it in there. So that's why we're doing the experiment with this comic.
Wow, that is awesome. So tell us about the first three books that you wrote. Is it a type of trilogy? Do they relate to one another?
Well, the way we designed is kind of interesting. The books, there's 3 volumes. And I think within the 3 volumes, as it stands right now, there are 14 individual stories. But we designed the stories so that you can read any of them in any order that you wish. You can pick. You can start with volume 3. Perfectly fine, because that actually talks about the creation of the trickster animal characters that are in the other parts of the story. But the framing story takes place 100 years from now. So it's also kind of a sequel. But the stories are designed to stand on their own. If you read one, you picked one up, you'll get it. There'll be a little bit of information the characters are referred to that maybe you're not familiar with. But as you read other stories, you'll pick up that information. The result is, at the end, it's almost like building a mosaic. So it doesn't matter. If you're building a mosaic, you can put the pieces on the wall, the little pieces of glass, to create that much bigger picture. It's the same thing with these stories. So you can read these stories in any order you wish, and as you complete all the series of stories within the 3 volumes, a much larger, grander picture emerges.
Wow. That sounds super cool. And then the villain you're saying is in the first story that happens right after the Ice Age and then comes back like in the 22nd century. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, actually, the villain shows up. The villain is I would call the villain is almost like the devil. She's
Mm.
not called the devil, but she has aspects of it. In other words, she was a created being by God, and she chose, instead of serving God and helping the people, she chose that she thought that she was better than anyone else. She was the number one being, or the top being of creation. And so she turned away from God, and so she became evil. And it's very similar to the story of what we know of the devil himself as a fallen angel. So the first battle in that of the whole, if you want to do it in a chronological sequence, at the end of the Ice Age, she, Legrube, that's a character's name, is with a group of people in what we now know as Trois-Rivières, Quebec, at the end of the Ice Age, just as the ice is receding. So you have these ancient Native Americans, and she's there teaching them, but teaching them badly, teaching them to be selfish, uh, to not, to be mean and uncaring to other people, and they're miserable. And it's the other trickster characters, the good beings that were created by God, that go in there and first battle her and drive her away. And that sets up a series of battles ongoing throughout the books, all the way up to the 22nd century, where she appears again. And so yeah, that is kind of it does tie in like that. And she'll see she appears again. So again, it kind of ties in with the circular nature of the books itself.
Mhm. I love that. That is what the Christian experience is, though. Like we're still battling things that have humans have always battled, and the devil is still around the earth. Tell a little bit about your influence. So we hear there's Christian influence, and sounds like Native American influence as well.
Yes. The number one influence for the books is my Algonquin ancestor. Her name was Rimete Wiawagwe. She lived in the 17th century in Trois-Rivières, Quebec. And as it turned out, her life story is fairly well documented by the Jesuit priests that lived in that area at that time. I mean, more documented than most people who were living at around that time. And what we do know, we know that when she was born, how old she was married twice. Her first husband was another fellow Algonquin named Asababish, and when she was 22 years old, her village was attacked by Mohawk tribe coming up from the south. And in that attack, her husband was killed, and their two small children were kidnapped by the Mohawks. So this is all true story, factual information about her. So at 22, she lost everything. She lost her husband. She lost her two small children. And so it's imagine someone barely out of their teens losing everything. And especially in a time period such as that, where you don't have the safety nets that we have today. 5 years later, she married a French settler named Pierre Cauque, and Pierre and Rimete Wiawagwe became my ancestors. Anyway, at the end of her life, when she died when she was 68 years old in 1699, the priest at Trois-Rivières wrote about her, and he said, Rimete Wiawagwe lived a full life with dignity, respect, and love, a courageous and loving Algonquin woman. So those two kind of bookend of her life that we know, and we know about who the children she had, but we took that information and we built a story around that. In fact, she is the old grandmother of the old grandmother book series, because some parts of the story follow her life, other parts of the story follow the story of some of her descendants, in old Quebec or even up to the 22nd century.
That is amazing that you were able to trace your history all the way back that far.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible.
So yeah, she was very inspirational. So that's why I've included that in that's the basis for the whole story. And you were mentioning about, as far as like Legrube character, the devil character. One of the themes of the fourth book that I've written, that I have it's being not published yet, but it's being illustrated, is that she finally has, before she dies, she has a confrontation with this Legrube character, who is the one who is responsible for that attack. She's the one who instigated that attack, the Mohawks to attack her village. So she tells Legrube, she demonstrates to Legrube that everything that she did to harm the people, the human beings, during Mitio Rimete Wiawagwe's life, the God creator, God, actually turned against Legrube, the devil, and ultimately shows that all the evil she did, God was able to bring good out of it. So that certainly is one of the very key Christian idea that I'm bringing out in that story
Mhm.
by analogy.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Similar to like C.S. Lewis or other authors, Tolkien, who have kind of used analogy to tell stories. I have to ask, what does your grandmother's name mean? Do you know? Like, that's
She's
very
keeper
well.
of the sacred waters of the lodge,
Wow.
and so we think that she probably was a healer.
Hmm.
You could say a medicine woman, but probably a healer. And in the fourth story, I have her at the end of her life, after she's been widowed the second time. Her second husband also passed away about 10 years before she died. She's living in the village of Trois-Rivières with the French, and she's working as a midwife. And so I showed that at the very beginning of that fourth book. And so, yeah, that's probably what she was. She was a healer.
That's beautiful. Were these stories always passed down through your family, or how did you get connected with all of this
No,
beautiful
no, we
heritage?
didn't know about her when I was growing up. I mean, I think I knew that my mother's family was French Canadian. Um, I could probably tell you who my great great grandparents were. Sometimes I think a few of them we had even photos. But back in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, there was always this veil. You really couldn't pierce that to know who they were. But nowadays, when we have tools like Ancestry.com, Genie.com, and we have DNA tests, all those tools together, I was able to piece the puzzle about where we came from. And it took a couple of years. The Native American ancestor is first identified when I gave my mother and five of her siblings, she was the oldest of 11, actually. I gave them a DNA test, and the Native American ancestry showed up in their DNA tests. So then
Mhm.
it took me about 2 years to find four gateway Native American ancestors, one of whom was Rimete Wiawagwe, who is known as the old grandmother, the inspiration of the. So once I discovered her story, that became part of the inspiration for creating these books. One of the inspirations. Another inspiration was my love of folk tales. And these books are structured, these stories are written not exactly as a historical fiction. There are people who have notable ancestors and they'll write like a historical novel about them. And they'll do research and they'll try to make it factual, very factual, but they'll have to still fill in the gaps. So in this one, we took a different approach. So we took the basic facts of her life, and talked about when she lost her family, and at the end of her life, what the priest wrote about her, that beautiful eulogy, and we immersed that into a world of folklore style magic in old Quebec, with trickster animal characters inspired by Native American folklore and mythology, and a little bit of magic in that style. So when you read these stories, they will seem familiar, even though they are original stories, because folklore, mythology, and folk tales in particular is a universal language. So that's why we chose that as a medium to tell the story.
Awesome. And how did you three get connected in the great trio that you are?
Oh, well, I think when I started writing the stories, excuse me, I Googled find an illustrator, and Masami was the first one that I found. And so initially it was just working with Masami. But as it turned out, she's really good at doing the storyboard design of stories, but she doesn't really enjoy as much doing the detail work on those illustrations. So what I ended up doing, especially as the book got bigger and bigger and bigger, the project got bigger, we split that work up. So I have a final illustrator, Natasha Pelley Smith, and I have Masami who does the storyboard working. So in a sense, the way the work is divided up is Masami and I will go through the stories and we will design the basic concept for every single illustration in the books. And then once that's complete, then I turn it over to Natasha and I work with her redesigning every illustration based on those concepts. So she'll she's not just going to color in the lines based on the sketches. She's going to create her own original illustrations based on those, and she'll change some things around too based on her ideas and her concepts. So it's kind of a mix of, I help design. I have ideas of what I'd like to see in the illustrations, but Masami has good ideas she puts into the design, and so does Natasha. And finding Natasha was when I needed another artist. Again, just Googled artist, and she popped up. One of the first people I found, and we hit it off right away as a team. And we've been working together now for a couple of years through this project.
That's great. That is amazing that that teamwork exists. Just bouncing off ideas is really a powerful way to kind of further your creativity too.
Yes.
How did you know that you were an author? Have you always been creative, or when did you first start experiencing that?
Um, well, I think I was always imaginative as a child. I think I always enjoyed stories, especially mythology stories. I would read Greek mythology, Norse mythology. It didn't matter. I always enjoyed reading those. But I really didn't start writing until 2013 after my brother had passed away. My younger brother had passed away from ALS. And so I started doing a blog and I would write on mathematics, philosophy, science, religion, history, whatever I wanted to. And, it did get some national notoriety occasionally. It did okay, but it was really for myself. It was an outlet for me. So I learned, I think, the art of writing at that time. And towards the end of when I was really actively writing that blog, I created my first creative fiction story, and it was set in ancient Greece, kind of again mythology, kind of recreating it. And so I enjoyed that. I enjoyed writing those kind of creative, imaginative stories. But I especially enjoyed writing because I would infuse them with lessons, morality, but I always do it in a very subtle way. It's never like bang it over your head, like really, really strong message. But it's done in a way that you read it, you'll enjoy the story, and you'll go, oh, it'll make you think. Maybe there's some things about relationships and people and living well that come out of the stories on their own. And so that was kind of the philosophy I use as a base for, again, designing Old Grandmother's Tree. Because when you read these stories, there are definitely lessons in there. There's definitely aspects about family, about relationships, about praying for each other, about older family members caring for younger family members. So a lot of that theme is in there, but it's never done in an overly heavy-handed way. And so that's kind of the philosophy we use to create these books also. And it's inspired by that earlier writing I did.
That's beautiful to just be able to incorporate elements in your life, but then also have that freedom of fiction that must
Hmm.
be just so freeing for you to be able to think of essentially anything you want to tell, any kind of moral like you're talking about, and be able to share that. How have your books been received so far?
I think overall sales is growing very slowly. I think one of the challenges of doing self-publishing that you can't just throw a book out there and expect it to be an instant bestseller. You have to put a lot of time and effort in, and I have been. But the books are in libraries throughout New England, several in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I also have the books in the library in Pembroke, Ontario, and they're being reviewed right now for two libraries in Quebec. One is the Haskell Free Library, which is kind of interesting. It straddles the border between Quebec and Vermont. In fact, the border goes right through the library. There's a black line on the floor.
Oh,
One
wow.
part is in Canada, one part's in the United States, which makes the books really perfect to find a home there. And also Magog, Quebec as well. I had a recent newspaper interview with the Magog newspaper. Quebec in French. And I also had a recent interview with the Toronto Globe and Mail. And I'm going to be doing a presentation in about next week to the California Berkeley Writers Club also. So they're going to discuss my book. So it's growing slowly, and I certainly one of the ways I'm trying to get the word out about the books is through podcasts, and I think I've done probably about 35 now, based on either United States, Canada, other places throughout the world as well.
That's awesome. Good for you. And congratulations on speaking next week. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Um, that is quite a lot of work to have to promote yourself. Would you say that's the hardest part, or what have you found is the hardest part of this whole process?
Um, I think it's just sticking with it because to create a book this size, um, it is and have it fully illustrated is just such a unique challenge. Most books don't really exist like this, and there's a reason for it because it's very difficult to follow through. So if I created like a short little children's book that was illustrated, that was maybe 35 pages long, that wouldn't be very hard to do if you knew if you had a good story to write and an illustrator to do. You could create something and it wouldn't take very long. If I wrote, let's say, a novella that was maybe 60,000 words long and I had no illustrations, I mean, it would take some work, but you can do that. And it's not, you write it, you have an editor look at it, proofread it, so on and so forth, and then you publish it and you're done. But when you're doing a project like this, when you have massive number of words and it's very dense with illustrations, it becomes very difficult to do. For one, the economics of working with illustrators can be challenging when you have a large project. For example, if you imagine a small book, if I only had like 25 illustrations in it, like I said, that children's book, if we have to make changes in an illustration, one or two illustrations, it's not going to delay the project very much. But when you're doing revisions and trying to check carefully your illustrations and trying to design them, make sure everyone is good, that adds up time wise. And a little bit of slippage when you're dealing with 700 illustrations, that adds up. So, from an economic point of view, it becomes a challenge because you have to fund your artists. And so, if you work on a fixed price contract, but the time slips past the end of that contract, then you have a situation where an artist is working and not getting paid, even though they've already been paid up front. So it becomes a difficult challenge for them because if they're doing a project for you, even though they've already been paid for it, but they're not getting new money in, that means they're not doing something else that could be bringing money in for them. So managing that part was by far the most difficult part of this project. And it's still very difficult for me to manage.
I bet. How do you navigate that? Is it easier now that you've worked together for, I'm assuming you've been working together for a couple of years maybe now, since there's
Yeah,
so
it
much.
is. It is. It is. I think it is difficult. Natasha's Pelly Smith out of Toronto is a very talented artist, and she's in high demand. So I have to compete with all those other projects also because she's not continuously doing work for me. So yeah, it is a challenge because I have to work with her schedule as well to finish up these illustrations. And
Hmm.
we've got, I don't know how many, about 100 and this next one is probably 130, 135 illustrations in this next book that's coming out. So that's still a lot of work.
Oh, for sure. And these are like you mentioned like the full page color illustrations.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I don't know if I have, we're probably not on. Let me show you real quick. This is like, I'll show you some of these just so you can see.
Oh, beautiful. Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
you do a
So,
great job.
yeah, these are, you can see, and this is a section of like the comics design. And this is
Mhm.
actually, this is actually the trickster animal characters skiing at Mount Orford in Quebec.
Oh,
So you
wow.
can see they're very detailed illustrations and they're beautiful. But to design each one of these, here's another one that I'm very pleased with. This is a map of Quebec.
Mm.
So, um, yeah, so it's definitely a challenge to do all these together. So, because we have to carefully work through them and we have to communicate frequently about them. It's not like I can just take this project with the rough sketches in it and hand it over to Natasha and say, okay, you do it and you just let me know when you're done. It has to still be a collaborative process between Natasha and myself as she designs these illustrations.
Oh, of course. What was it like to see the first illustration, like see your characters come to life, or maybe it was when you saw the your first book printed for the first time. What was that feeling
I
like?
think it was very exciting. I think to see that those characters come to life, especially knowing that it came from part of within myself, my own imagination. Even though I didn't do the actual drawing of the illustrations, I did write the stories and I did help design the illustrations. So, like what was in them and how they were, what was contained, what were the illustrations designed to show. So, to see that brought to life definitely was a very fulfilling and exciting moment when a new book comes out.
And you said there's going to be 12 of these, is that right?
12 books? No. Right now, I have the three. We have a 20-page comic that is going to come out as a preview. I'm probably going to include that in volume four as well as offer independent sale. There'll be a volume four. I have ideas for two more volumes, but again, because of the economics of it, I have to kind of just wait and see what happens and let things catch up. Once I have the four books published, though, I think I have a pretty good complete story because the fourth book will focus on the actual attack that where Rimete Wiawagwe lost her first family, as she recounts that story to her granddaughter. So once I have that, I have a pretty good set of stories. And one of the things I want to do at that time is start marketing the whole set to a production company to be made into like a Netflix TV series, maybe a one season short series or Apple TV streaming service of some kind, or even a film. And I think the advantage that I have in doing that is that these stories are already storyboarded because they're so illustration dense. So a lot of that initial step in thinking to create that into a film, the animated film medium, some of that work has already been done. And I also think that the stories are good. And they're also, because they're individual stories in there, that kind of lends itself to being episodic in nature as well.
That sounds perfect. And I think that's a great idea to market it that way. And you're right, the storyboard just kind of sets it up really well. Would you ever change an ending, or do you like exactly how the story is?
I wouldn't want to change the ending. And I think one of the challenges, if you do turn it into another set of creative people, filmmakers, they have their own ideas about these stories. They
Mm.
may have their own interpretations of the characters. So, how do you protect my artistic vision as a writer for these characters in that environment is something that of course, I haven't reached that point yet, but that's something I can see as a challenge. But I wouldn't want to change like the nature of these characters. I wouldn't want to have anyone, dump down the religious aspects in the stories because they're there because they're true to the characters because that's who they were at that time period. So I think those would be the challenges to the story when it moves into that medium because again you'd be working with a totally new set of people with their own ideas as well.
Mhm. How would you say that your faith plays into this? You mentioned allegory. Are there specific Bible stories that are referenced?
No, this book I gave you a glance at it. The third book, The Dance of Creation, is kind of a retelling of the creation of the world, but it's the original story, but it's kind of a mix of mythology stories from around the world, but heavily relied on Native American style and thinking as talking about the creation of the world. But
Mhm.
there's certainly aspects of it that definitely follow in with the traditional Christian or Judaic Genesis story. For one, God creates the world. In this case, in the book, God dances the universe into existence. That's why it's called the dance of creation. God creates people and places human beings into this beautiful world. God creates, or the creator, as he's called in the Dance of Creation book, creates elder beings to be the teachers and guardians of humanity, which are, of course, are angels. That's the analogy there. And I have one of them go bad, Legrube, so that's the analogy for the devil. So although I use different terminology, there definitely is a similarity in the concepts that already we're very familiar with in our own Christian Judaic creation stories.
Oh, I love that. That's a great tie to things we're familiar with, but then
Mhm.
still introducing new ideas. And the dancing idea is really beautiful. And I'm guessing there's illustrations for all of this as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can show you. I guess we're not. I'm not sure this podcast is audio or visual, but I will show you
Cool.
this illustration. This shows the creator
Wow.
dancing the world, and if you notice, there's actually three beings there representing the Trinity,
Hmm.
but they do not look like the traditional design of what we would normally visualize: the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But they're there, but
Hmm.
they're a different kind of style. But I chose dance because I think dancing in itself is an exertion of energy within the person doing the dancing, and I think it's also very expressive. So I think God's, trying to come up with an analogy that God as a creator danced the world into existence, I think expresses that the creation of the world is an expression of God's own energy and God's own essence in creating the world. And it was an active action. It wasn't a passive action.
So he chose to make the world his beautiful art because he wanted to.
Right, very much. That's exactly right. And so I think that's why I chose the dance as the means of creation.
Beautiful symbolism. I think you did a great job there. Um,
Thank you.
are there other different elements that you're incorporating to show movement or show different types? I guess I think of dance as being a very cultural thing as well, like different cultures have different types of dance. Are there other kind of elements like that specific to our Native Americans who lived in this area?
Not not specific. There are other elements, but I think that not necessarily unique to Native American. One is that there are a couple of times in the story that characters will walk together to some place. Like
Mm.
one of my favorite chapters is in the second book where Poku the moose is carrying his uncle Mikish the turtle on his back after having a day's adventures in the old French village in old Quebec, and they're walking back to their home at Mount Orford in Quebec. So the chapter is called A Talk on the Way to Mount Orford. And so there are other scenes like that where characters are walking together in between destinations. And while they're doing that, they're having very important conversations. And I was really inspired by that because when I was growing up, as a family, like after Easter dinner or we had Sunday dinner, we visit our grandparents and be with my aunts and uncles. One of the things we used to do is we would go for a family walk and walk together and talk and visit, or I'd walk with my brothers and we'd have a conversation and talk. So I really incorporated that idea as a way of movement. And I think walking also from one place to the other as you're talking and discussing also symbolizes the movement within the person themselves who's having the conversation. They're moving to a different place from when they started, a different perspective that they're going to arrive at the end. So they're arriving at two different destinations, one internal and one external to a different location, a physical place. So that's another way the symbology works there.
Yeah, for sure. That's perfect too. A lot of times I think walking is just, oh, we're transitioning until the next big event happens, but there's so much that happens in those little moments too.
Right, right, absolutely, absolutely. Um, Another key aspect that shows up in there is in the a couple of times in the book is prayer. And in fact, the
Mm.
very first story of the very first book, the grandfather of Mimateo Wagwe goes to a church and prays for his granddaughter. He prays to Jesus specifically at the advice of the priest because he was worried about his granddaughter. And he has a very heartfelt conversation. And one of the things he says right off the bat, he says, Father Ragano told us, Jesus, that you wept for your friend Lazarus when he died. And he says, the grandfather says to Jesus, he says, well, Jesus, did you weep for Asababish, Mimete Wagwe's husband, when he died? And then he says, Jesus, Father Ragano told us that you have felt pity for the widow when she lost her only son. And he says, well, Jesus, did you feel pity for my granddaughter when she lost her children? And it's just a very heartfelt prayer. He just asks these questions. And as he's sitting there, he finally realizes he's saying, I'm talking too much about myself. And he finally focuses and he gives his prayer to God, to Jesus, and he says, bless my granddaughter, help her to find a love in her life, a husband, and bless them with children. And
Mhm.
he's just very focused on that. And then he thinks for another moment and he says, I really haven't been a good person all the time. I haven't been perfect. Why would Jesus listen to me? So then he looks up and says, Jesus, don't hold my foolishness against my granddaughter. Because I have not always lived up to what I should be doing, but don't hold that against her. So he goes through that whole sequence of prayer. But what I really liked about it was he was speaking right from his heart. He wasn't like praying some kind of rote prayer. He was having a conversation with God. And so that's why I really, in particular, liked that chapter.
Mhm. Yeah, that raw grief is something that I think we kind of shy away from
Hmm.
because we're supposed to rely on God and we're supposed to have that faith. But what if you have faith and you still have raw grief? And I think you demonstrated that beautifully.
Yes, yes. So, so that's and there's another section where there's other prayers in there as well. And another aspect is just the mystery, some of the mystery of the characters themselves and what they encounter. Because when some of the French settlers in the early 1900s encounter the trickster animal characters, they don't know what to make of them. And that in itself is a symbology of how the newer world, our Western culture, encountering the older Native American world, leads to confusion and misunderstanding. And
Mm.
so it's another symbology in the stories as well.
Yeah. Wow. These are not children's books for sure. I mean, it sounds like it sounds like a wide open demographic. Everyone can read it, but you've just packed so much, so many themes that adult brains need to wrap their minds around in the,
Yes. I've had somebody look at this and say, "Oh, this is all these illustrated. This is a kid's book," and I'm like, "No, they're not children's books." I would say I primarily wrote them for adults, but they're books that adults would enjoy reading to their children, and some children read them on their own, but they're definitely not books for small children. I don't know if I have time to read something maybe kind of interesting from my fourth book. Do we
yes,
have time?
go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to read you a section here. I'm going to read you a short section, and so I'm going to set the scene. So this is right during the attack that the Mohawks attacked Mimatewiwagwe's Algonquin village, and her husband was killed, and her two children were kidnapped, and she never saw them again the rest of her life. So I'm going to read this, and this kind of gives you illustrative how sometimes the theme can be a little dark, but I think it's important because sometimes we need darkness in order to really appreciate the light.
Mm.
There has to be that contrast. So I'm going to read this. So at this point of the story, she's narrating the event to her granddaughter, her 16-year-old granddaughter, about what happened. And at this point, she had left her children. She heard that her husband was gravely wounded, and she left her children in the care of her sister, Kahenta. So I'm going to pick up from there. After I left my children in the care of my sister, I ran to where Asa Babish had fallen in the fighting, but he died of his wounds moments before I arrived. Asa Babish died defending your grandfather Pierre, and he himself took the blow that was meant for Pierre. As I stood there in shock, I remembered my children and I ran back to my house. When I got there, they were all gone, along with Kahenta, my sister. Rimete Wiawagwe looked out the window. At that moment, I realized that I had lost everything: my children, my husband, and my sister. The grandmother, Rimete Wiawagwe, turned back to Marguerite, her granddaughter. There was so much emotion within me, without any outlet or way to express how I felt. I collapsed to the floor and just stared into the dim emptiness in front of me. Her granddaughter responded, I don't know how I could understand. Marguerite, the granddaughter, gently wiped a tear from her grandmother's cheek. Pray that you never do, my dear one, said Marie Wiawagwe. She gently placed both of her hands on her granddaughter's cheeks. I was only a bit older than you are now, and up until that moment, I was a naive and innocent girl who knew nothing of violence and war. Marie Wiawagwe looked deep into her granddaughter's eyes. That innocent girl, that girl that was me, died on the floor of that empty longhouse, and I have mourned for her the rest of my life.
Hmm. Beautiful writing. Very well done.
Well, thank you. And that's
Yeah.
the cover.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Campfires in the sky. Awesome.
Campfires in the Sky, yes. So you can read that with children because sometimes loss is something that we all face. It's part of the human existence. But it's probably a story like that when it focuses on death and kidnapping of children. It's a story you should read with your children and not necessarily let your children read that alone without you. Now, having said that, not all the stories have that tone. Some stories are just more philosophical and thoughtful. Some of the stories in the book are just frankly farcical because you're dealing with animal trickster characters, and there's really not a lot of heavy thinking in those. They're just fun stories with a lot of mayhem and mischief. So there definitely is a wide variety of tone in the stories. But I wanted to share that one because I think it really talks to the power of how she starts at the very bottom of losing everything, but at the end of her life, the priest could say that she lived a life of dignity, respect, and love and courage. So that she had this long journey in between that moment when she lost everything to the end of her life, she was respected by everyone around her.
Hmm. Yeah, and the idea of reading this with your kids adds to that bonding, that family bonding that you talk
Hmm.
about, that kind of
Yes.
thing in your books too. Wow, that's awesome. I cannot wait to read these. I'm sure my listeners are going to love these as well. Do you have any final last words for the listeners out there?
Well, the books are for sale on Amazon, and they're available in French and English, or English and French, softcover and hardcover. And I would invite you also to visit my website, which is oldgrandmotherstree.com, and written as one word and no apostrophe in there, oldgrandmotherstree.com. And in there, you'll find my biography, the biography of Natasha. You'll find some background information, some research about Marie Mateo Wiwagwe's life from the sources about the Jesuits. There are records about her life. Um, I also have a character Wikipedia, which has like I think right now well over 100 items listed in there. So if you want to have get a feel of what these stories are like, read through the Wikipedia. I think it'll definitely whet your appetite. You go, oh, I'd like to learn about how all these characters all fit together to the bigger story.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Joseph. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to reading your books.
All right, thank you for having me on today.